The story happened in the year of 2009. I had a newly purchased motorcycle, and since then I started going on long rides as well as midnight road trips to Antipolo back to Quezon City, just to chill out in the overlooking view of the city. One weekend, a family friend invited me to come over for a fiesta located at Laguna, and since I love traveling during the night, I decided to leave Manila at 2 a.m., so I'd be at the place by 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. I left the house and went to the nearest gasoline station to refuel and check my bike, and of course check if I have my license and other necessary things needed for the journey. Since there is almost no traffic, I'm already at Marikina City at 2:30 a.m. and exactly 3 a.m. at Teresa Antipolo Rizal. It's an accident-prone mountain highway which is the shortest route to my destination. So far, the trip is fine, until I reached Pical Laguna Cemetery just beside the National Highway. My bike's throttle won't start, so I stopped to check if the line snapped. I looked around with my flashlight, and yeah, it hit me hard when reality sets in with me being in the middle of a dark highway beside a cemetery. I shined the light, and surprisingly the bike is fine. So I packed the tools and sat down to my bike. Now my bike won't turn on. Now I started to get ticked off because I felt like I was being played with. When I was still young, my grandparents always tell me that spirits or other elements mess with travelers by doing all sorts of stuff with their vehicles. So I said out loud, "I'm sorry if I disturbed you. Please let me pass peacefully." Suddenly, I heard a child's laugh in the distance. Then I felt as if I was being surrounded. I started to feel so cold, then sweating and shaking as I started kickstarting my bike because it won't start automatically. And then out of nowhere, a small rock hit the back of my helmet, and I heard the creepy child's laugh again. Except this time it was as if the laugh was just behind me. My bike finally started, and I sped like hell out of there as if I were in a drag race. When I reached a gasoline station, I calmed my nerves, tried to make sense of what the hell just happened, and waited until daybreak to go to the fiesta. When I arrived, I told them what happened to me at the highway. An old man at the opposite side of the table told me that I must have forgotten to honk the horn before passing the cemetery. That's why the spirits played a prank on me. I did not pay respect. Since then, I'd never traveled to that highway at night. Two summers ago, my now ex-girlfriend Kat and I were sitting next to the edge of this cliff at a beach on New York's North Shore overlooking the water, with a nice view of Connecticut's coastline. It was super dark, the only real light source being the full moon above us. We were just chilling looking up at the clear night sky looking for shooting stars, one of our favorite nighttime activities. The whole reason we always went to this beach, especially the part we were at, was because no one ever went there. It's pretty isolated and hard to find unless you're really searching for it. You have to walk through a trail for about 10 minutes or so first before it opens up into a small area free of foliage. Above the main part of the beach below, it was a great little spot to smoke some bud in peace. We were having a good time, talking about stupid shit and passing a bowl to each other, and then I heard this mumbling, followed by twig snapping behind us. I put my index finger up, signaling for Kat to be quiet, and I turned and looked into the dark foliage for about a minute, but there was nothing. It was a little weird because it was around 1 a.m., but I thought maybe it was just some other people exploring the trails. No big deal, right? Then I heard it again, that same mumbling followed by twig snapping, closer this time. I quickly turned again, and there was a dude standing right at the edge of the tree line, which was about 10 feet away from us. He had long, dark hair, no shirt or shoes on, just jeans and a weird tribal-looking necklace. It was so dark and his hair was so long and thick that it shrouded his face, so I couldn't really make out any distinct features. He was kind of whispering, but it was a really quiet night, There was no wind and no waves crashing below us. His voice made the hairs on my arms stand up. It was really monotoned but soft, and he was speaking French. I don't speak fluent French, but I understand a good amount of it due to the fact that I spent 10 years of my life on the southeast border of England, right by the Channel Tunnel, so I learned some in school and also dealt with a lot of French tourists when I worked at a fish and chip shop. As depuis de la mort. Now, somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that roughly translates to, "Are you afraid of death?" Maybe I didn't hear him right. It had been almost 4 years since I moved back to New York by then, so I responded, "Quelle?" As depuis de la mort. Nope, I definitely heard him correctly. I stood up, facing him, and my eyes adjusted to the darkness behind him a little, where I saw 2 more people on either side of him, a girl in some kind of white dress, and another shirtless guy slightly further back. They were just standing there. I didn't say anything. I just crouched down to Kat, who had remained silent the whole time, keeping my eyes fixed on these weirdos. I grabbed her hand, bringing her up to a standing position, and slowly walked us toward a much less steep part of the cliff, where we were able to carefully climb down towards the main area where I had parked my car, avoiding the trail, all while constantly looking over my shoulder. I was visibly shaken by the whole ordeal. I'm not a small dude, I'm 6'4", but my girlfriend was a 4'11" little Latina chick, and I had left my knife at home, so I wasn't taking any chances. Kat kept asking me what the guy was saying, but I didn't want to creep her out too much, so I just told her I didn't know, and that they were probably just tourists asking for directions or something. She wasn't buying it, but she eventually dropped it once we got in my car. This may be pretty tame, and it definitely doesn't compare to some of the crazy shit I've read on here, but it gave me the fucking creeps, and I've avoided going to that beach ever since. This happened on Saturday. My girlfriend Tess, my puppy Jack, and I are all getting ready for a road trip. We're planning on meeting some friends at their house and then starting the trip from there. On our way to their house, at around 11 a.m., a white car with all tinted windows cuts us off and brake checks us close enough that I had to slam the brakes and swerve to avoid an accident. Out of anger, I honked and flipped the driver off. I wish I hadn't done this. Immediately, the driver rolls down his window and waves his hand over. He slows down to go back into the other lane so that our cars are parallel to one another. The driver is gesturing wildly and yelling at us while we continue driving down the avenue. I proceed to make gestures to calm down and then try to ignore him and continue driving. He continues driving right next to us. Eventually, I try speeding up, and he revs in front of me and tries brake checking me again. At this point, I swerve to the other lane, and he again slows down to match my vehicle's speed. He is still gesturing and screaming while I try to ignore him. Suddenly, he reaches in his lap and I notice he is holding a glass bottle. He throws it and it shatters at the side of my vehicle. Tess is hysterical at this point, and the pup had hidden under the passenger seat. I go into adrenaline mode and try turning into different streets as the chase ensues. He is following close behind when he throws another glass bottle that shatters against my back window. I tell Tess to call the police as we speed down a 2-lane street and up a hill. She calls 911 as I come to a stop at the light at the top of the hill. The guy chasing us slows down to a stop behind us. Suddenly, he hops out of his vehicle, and in my rearview mirror I see him reach back into his car and grab something and put it into his shorts. He begins walking toward my side of the car. As the car in front of me drives away, I nope the fuck out of there, slammed the gas and turned into the next avenue. Within a minute, he has caught back up to us, as I am now on speaker with 911 explaining the situation and giving them details of his car and appearance. Tess is crying as we speed down a busy avenue, waving in between cars at 20 above the speed limit. I'm updating the 911 lady with where we are. I'm updating the 911 lady with where we are, and she tells me to drive to the station. At the next red light, he yells, now audibly, "Do we have a problem? Don't fucking flip me off!" I'm trying to gesture that we do not have any problem. He is still trying to get me to get out of the car. The light is still red, and he again hops out of his vehicle. I again floor through the red light, and he continues chasing as I make my way toward the police station. We are now accelerating and brake checking each other as he tries to drive me off the road. I make gestures that he should continue following, hoping to get him to the station. About a block from the police, we get stuck in a busy intersection. There are many cars around as he again walks up to my car. This time I'm boxed in, and Tess is panicking. I'm looking for any escape option to no avail. The drivers around us notice and many put their windows up and lock their doors. He comes right up to my window, slaps it with his palm, and asks one more time if there was a problem. "Is there a fucking problem?" I again adamantly say no. The 911 lady tells me to not engage over the phone speaker. He says, "Good." He gets back into his car and then speeds away. 20 minutes into this horrible car chase experience, we end up meeting with the cops and they say there was nothing they could do, even though I updated them with more detail of his direction and where he was last. We calmed down and then continued our road trip. So yeah, guy in the white unmarked sedan, let's not meet again. To give a bit of background, apartment complexes are frequently run by management companies. They decide the day-to-day decisions, including who works where, but they do not own the actual buildings or land. So it's also pretty common for a complex to switch management companies. Since you work for the management company and not the owner, if your company gets fired, you too are typically fired. This is what more or less happened to me. One day I worked for Company A, and the next day I went in and was told, "Company A was fired. We like you, so if you want to stay, you now work for Company B." It sucked, but it was better than being outright fired. At Company B, my boss was a guy named John. John was an older guy, about in his 60s, with a very used car salesman vibe about him. He was always friendly and polite, but it was noticeably fake. He would come in almost every day to observe and train us, always talking down to us like children. Part of his training was instructing us to lie to residents if it meant they'd sign a lease. Promise them anything they want if it means they sign the lease. As long as you don't put the promise in writing, we don't have to give them anything. He called all of us sweetheart, and almost every day he'd ask all of us women out for drinks. It was the same thing every single day. He'd tell us we deserved a treat and would offer to take us out for drinks. We'd decline. He'd then say lunch. Again, we'd decline. Then he'd say we should get dinner. Again, we'd say no, that we typically ate dinner with our husbands. It got to the point that we'd tell him A, it was a bad idea to be drinking in the middle of the workday, and B, that his consistent asking was inappropriate. He'd just laugh and say, "I was joking, it's a joke." These jokes continued. One day, John asked to meet with me to discuss our reports. This wasn't that unusual. He came in every day to talk about the reports. What was a bit strange was that he specifically scheduled the meeting and at a time I would be working alone. When he showed up, he closed the office door and sat next to me at the desk. He didn't ask about the reports, instead making weird small talk with me. He asked about my family and suggested my father sounded like an alcoholic, and suggested I must have daddy issues. He then told me about his own alcohol issues and referred to himself as a recovered alcoholic, something I found very strange considering he consistently wanted to take us out for drinks. He then asked what I do on my free time. I told him art and writing. "Oh, that's cool. I love writing. What kind of stories do you write?" "It's kind of weird, but mostly fan fiction, based off of comics." "Oh, you should bring it in tomorrow so I can read it." "No, I don't think so. The only person that reads my fan fiction is my cousin. I'm not comfortable sharing it with anyone else." "You'll bring it in if you don't want to get fired." I was shocked. I didn't know what to say in response to that. He continued, "You and I have a lot in common. We're alike, and that's why I like you. Not like Sarah. She works out too much. Her body is too muscular and tight. It just really doesn't fit with our company culture. Sarah is one of our best employees. Yeah, she works out a lot, but that's what she likes to do with her free time. Well, we're firing her, and you better not tell her unless you want to get fired too." From this, he segued into the actual purpose of the meeting, the reports. He bent over my shoulder to look at the papers while I explained to him that not much had changed since the day before. The apartments were getting rented, and we were on schedule. "Good, that's very good," he said. He began to stroke the bare skin of my shoulder. "You're a good girl. Good girl." I thought my skin was going to rot and fall off. I just couldn't believe he'd actually touched me. After I left, I texted my coworkers, warning them of the touch, but afraid to tell them what he'd said. I also called my boss from my old company, Company A, begging she rehire us at one of the complexes they still managed. Thankfully, she did. I wish I could say this was my last time dealing with John. Unfortunately, the same situation repeated itself at another complex I was working at about a year later. I came in one day to the news. Company B is the new management company. They'd like to keep you on. Again, I was faced with the reality that John was my boss. This time, John wasn't nearly as hands-on. He only came in 3 times before Company B got fired. The first time was on my first day with Company B. He came in to do our hire paperwork with someone from HR. He tried to deny knowing me, making a point to say, "Oh no, I've never met this woman before in my life. I would definitely remember if I had ever worked with her." He then slipped up later in the conversation, revealing something he would only know about me if he in fact already knew me. The second time was on a day that a new leasing agent was hired. He came in for her training, which was just her sitting and reading the employee handbook while we awkwardly sat in silence. Then, just barely above a whisper in a mocking voice, "Tia thought she can get away from me. She was wrong." The last time was when he snuck up on me in the model. I turned around and there he was. I was painfully aware of how trapped I was as he backed me into a corner. Thankfully, the maintenance man saw him follow me into the model and happened to walk in before he could do anything. As I previously mentioned, Company B got fired, so John was gone after that. I still have to see him sometimes at regional events, like training and trade shows. I'm lucky nothing too serious ever happened, but as time goes on, the worse I feel about it. I was so miserable at the time, and consistently afraid I was going to get fired if I didn't do what he said. It just sucks. For reference, I'm a female in my late 20s, and about a week ago I had an unsettling encounter. The city I live in is surrounded by reserved land set aside by the city planners, which is a forest of pine trees. I usually walk my dogs up in the area closest to me, which is about a 10-minute walk from the middle of the town. It's one of my favorite places to go, but now I'm nervous about going in the area alone. The city is usually very safe, and I've never had any concerns out by myself, even in the dark, and I've been in the forest when it's dark many times with no incident. The track where I access the forest is at the top of a dead-end street. Though a park with a playground and up a long series of steps, it's quite secluded. I have 2 dogs, an older one and a 1-year-old. They're working breeds, so very high energy, although the older one is now arthritic and doesn't need much exercise, but the younger one needs a huge amount of off-the-leash exercise daily, which is why I was out in this particular evening. The older dog is also very shy and has a nervous disposition. It was after work in winter, so the sun had just gone down. It was also bad weather, nearly a storm, and raining. Though the trees shelter you from most of the rain. I get into the forest and let my dogs off the leash. We meet a couple of other people, also with high-energy dogs along the way. As I was walking along one of the tracks, my dogs were up ahead running up and down the banks at the sides of the tracks, and I noticed up ahead there was a man sitting on a seat. I could see he was dressed in dark blue track pants and a leather jacket, over a hooded jersey, head down staring at the ground. His hood was up and I couldn't see his face. He was just standing there in the rain, and I immediately got bad vibes from him. I try to shake it off as just someone out for a walk, but decide to stay alert just in case. A few minutes later, the older dog looked back at something behind me and then just bolted, clearly spooked, running in the direction of the playground. I'd never seen her run away like that before, and the younger dog ran after her. I yelled for her to come back, but she was gone. The younger one comes back when I called, but keeps running up ahead and back like he can't decide who to go with. That's when I look behind me and see the same man a little bit further behind me. I start to get really nervous about the man, but more about my dog who has run away. The track I am on makes a large loop before ending back at the playground, but the track below led straight back, so I quickly climb down the bank onto the lower track and start hurrying after my dog. Not running because I have a bad back, but walking as fast as I can. The track is muddy and slippery, so I'm trying to go slow so I don't slip. By this time, it got pretty dark. When I get near to the steps, I see both dogs sitting there, and they come running up very excited to see me. Relieved, I turn around and the man is right behind me. He had to have run or followed me down the bank to get there that quickly. I realize that I really need to get back to a populated area and head down the steps as fast as my back will let me. When I get to the bottom of the steps, I put the dogs back on their leash. The younger dog starts growling for the first time in his life, and I glance back. The man is halfway down the steps, and when he sees me, he suddenly stops and proceeds to tie his shoelaces. I keep looking at him with my dog still growling. He shoots me a long, angry look, then turns around and walks back up the steps into the darkness of the forest. Nothing bad actually happened, but it really got my adrenaline pumping, and I can only guess what might have happened if I didn't have my dogs with me. At least the younger one, because the older one was absolutely useless in a protection capacity. So, creepy man in the forest, let's not meet again. This happened back in 2012, when I was 15. There is a youth center in my city that used to do annual camping trips to Sweden. Me and my two friends, Sarah and Michelle, decided to go. The campground was set with an office and a kiosk at the entrance, and all the caverns and tents behind it. In front of the office was a giant parking lot that you would have to cross to get to the showers and bathrooms. The office was located in one corner, and the bathrooms in the opposite corner furthest away. There were 3 male teachers with us on this trip, all in their mid-20s. Every day they would take us to a supermarket nearby, in case we wanted something that the kiosk didn't sell. While we were in line to pay, we noticed a guy, probably in his early 20s. He was dressed in black cargo pants, big leather boots, and a leather jacket, despite it being over 30 degrees. But the most noticeable thing about him was his hair, or lack thereof. He had no hair, no eyebrows, and no eyelashes. He looked like he had gone through chemotherapy. We kind of felt sorry for him because he was so young, and we talked about him on our way back. When we got back, we hung out a bit, just chilling in the lake, before we went to the kiosk to buy something to drink. where we saw the guy again. We thought it was a coincidence. Even though there weren't that many people on the campsite, he could very well be living there. Later that afternoon, Sarah had to use the bathroom, and because it was so far away and slightly deserted, me and Michelle went with her. There was a bench and a table just outside the cabin that held the bathrooms, and guess who was sitting there? The same guy from earlier. He was sitting there with 3 friends, 2 girls and a guy, and when we got close enough, he stood up and looked like he wanted to say something. Sarah and Michelle, who have always been a bit paranoid, speeded up and went into the bathroom, but I hung back a bit and asked if he wanted anything. He looked at my friends and started shaking his head no, and sat back down. I kind of stood there for a couple of seconds because he looked so sad, before joining my friends. Me and Michelle sat in the changing room adjacent to the bathroom, and after a couple of minutes, one of the girls from outside came in and started talking to us in Swedish. Even though the Scandinavian languages are similar to each other, it can still be hard to understand, so we spent a couple of minutes explaining that we weren't Swedish before she started speaking broken English. She told us that her friend, the bald guy, was very shy, and if we just wanted to go speak with him for a couple of minutes. Now, we were 3 girls in a foreign country, and he was at least a couple of years older than us. We didn't want to speak with him, and we told her this. She was talking with us for more than 20 minutes. In the beginning, she just wanted us to speak with him. Then she wanted one of us to go to his tent with him. Then she asked us to sleep with him. At this point, she was very frantic and kept switching from Swedish to English, so it was kind of hard to understand. But she said in Swedish, "You just need to sleep with him. If you won't do it with him, he'll do it to me." At this point, Sarah was finally done in the bathroom and came out to see what was happening. The girl looked like she was about to cry and left the room. Sarah wanted to see who it was, so we all looked out of the little window, and I'm so glad that we did. We saw the girl say something to the guy. He looked over at the bathroom door, slammed his fist on the table, got up, and walked over to the door. We didn't know what to do because he was blocking the only exit, so we all went into the little bathroom stall and locked the door. We heard the guy knocking on the door to the changing room, and we all held our breaths. After a while, he knocked again, but we still kept quiet, not even moving. After a while, we heard the door open, but he was clearly trying to be quiet. He slowly walked towards the bathroom door, and all we could hear was the heavy sound of his boots on the floor. He sat down just outside the door and just sat there. For 45 minutes, we could hear his heavy breathing on the other side of the door. For those 45 minutes, we didn't care about how much noise we made. He already knew we were there. We tried to find the number for the Swedish police, but we didn't have any service on our phones because we were in a different country, and we didn't have our teachers' numbers, so we couldn't call them. So we just sat there panicking for the most part. Suddenly, he got up, kicked the door, and walked outside again. We were dead quiet and didn't move for another 10 minutes, scared that he was trying to lure us out. All of a sudden, the door opened again, and we could hear someone fumbling with something, either keys or some tools. We were afraid that he had found something to open the door with, but then we remembered that there was this little box that you would put money in to get the shower started. We asked who it was, and someone responded the janitor or something. I was kind of in shock, so I didn't listen properly. We took a chance and slowly opened the door, ready to close it again quickly if it was him. The man on the other side wasn't the same guy though, as he was at least 60. We asked him if he saw the other guy, and he told us that he told him to leave, as he had seen him leave the girl's changing room. We thanked the man and started walking towards the office, where we met the owner, and she quickly got our teachers there. We were all very shocked, so it was hard to get the words out of us, but in the end, we managed to tell our teachers what had happened. All the teachers were outraged, and 2 of them immediately left to see if they could find the guy. The night police came to talk with us and told us that sleep with in Swedish means the exact same thing as it does in English, and the fact that the girl said that he was going to do it to her really showed his intentions. The police never found the guy, but we discovered that the two teachers that went to look for him did find him. We overheard a conversation between the teachers, and apparently they threatened him so bad he almost cried. I understand why. The teachers were both quite tall and strong. For the longest time after, I still get the creeps every time I see a bald guy. So creeper who might have had cancer, let's not meet again. When I was around 3 or 4, I had an experience that has forever changed my life and belief in the paranormal. This is one of, if not the oldest memory of my childhood. I am nearly 30 years old at this point. Anyway, during this time I was being instructed by my parents to learn to sleep alone in my bedroom. Previously, I was allowed to sleep in their bed. This did not sit well with me. As with most children, I had an irrational fear of the dark and being alone during the night. But they insisted, and so I would be led to bed fairly early by adult standards, around 8 or 9 p.m. Since it was still early in the evening for them, they would go about their business and be doing things in the living room, where I could still see lights and hear the sounds of the household. This was comforting enough for me because I had no night lights or siblings. Knowing others were around and awake made me feel safe. I drifted off to sleep while the ambient noise and light was still around, and that's the last thing I remember until the encounter. Suddenly I was jolted from my sleep, and the house was black. My room and the whole house was dead quiet to the point of hearing the ringing noise that occurs when there is no other sound being made. I was instantly on edge and afraid with heightened senses and an acute awareness of my surroundings. I'm not sure what woke me up, but I was terrified. My bed faced the doorway to my room, which opened up into a small hallway and led to another unoccupied bedroom and a bathroom. For a few minutes I sat straight up in bed and looked at the doorway. I was compelled to look in that direction. It's almost as if I was instinctively anticipating something or someone to walk from the hallway into my room. Lo and behold, that is exactly what occurred a few moments later. The first thing to appear into vision was a bony, deformed hand and arm, and in an instant, it disappeared. And the next, a portfolio of a skeletal woman's face with bedraggled hair and a torn dress. Another disappearance, and it reappeared now facing me with an outstretched band, mouth agape with empty sockets. This apparition was moving in what seemed like the flash of a camera. The only way I can describe it would be quickly disappearing and reappearing, having repositioned and moved. Another reason I liken this to camera flashing is because of her color. It wasn't pale or green like I've heard other stories describe some ghost as. No red eyes, or shadowy a form or shape. This thing, this woman, was clearly defined in shape and detail, but her color was like when you see a flash of light or stare at the sun. That multicolor that shows up in the back of your eyes and then appears when you reopen them. She made it about halfway into my room before I cowered under the covers expecting the worst. But then, nothing happened. She had been moving toward me and should have reached me, but she never did. I waited for what seemed like forever with my eyes closed and tensed up, but nothing more. After a while, I worked up the courage to leave my covers and look at my surroundings again. The ghost was gone. Or at least not in my room. But I didn't stick around to find out what would happen if I stayed. I bolted to my parents' room and spent the rest of the night there. I told my parents the next morning, and we had the house blessed. and I did not have any more experiences, at least nothing as vivid or definitive as what I saw that night. But this all bugs me because I was so young, and I wasn't old enough to be exposed to anything that would put that image into my head. I had not seen any scary movies or even knew very well what a ghost was or did. Plus, with how the ghost appeared, it's all too crazy for me to have been made up in my mind because I was just so frightened. Since this experience, I have believed in the paranormal. It changed me, and I feel there are so many things that we can't explain.